Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Scope here on British Muslim TV with me, your host, Waqar Rizvi. We're joining you live today, of course, on satellite as well as throughout BMTV's various social media platforms. Please be, of course, sure to send in any comments or questions that you may have to these numbers at the bottom of your screen, even during this show, of course. And certainly send in your comments even afterwards when you're watching this recording. Now, a report commissioned by Facebook and Instagram's parent company Meta has recently found that the social media platform's policies harmed the digital rights of Palestinians during Israel's May 2021 attack on Gaza. They limited Palestinians' ability to speak of their experiences during those attacks, as well as other pertinent information. Now, Arabic posts about violence by Israel were deleted at a much higher rate than any Hebrew posts related to that attack during that period. It can be argued that, of course, little of this comes as a shock to many Palestinian and other users of these social media platforms regarding their censorship of certain viewpoints. Palestinian accounts have often been suspended, deleted, had their reach limited on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and others. This once again then brings a spotlight onto these platforms' claim of providing a neutral space and that they do not align with any one side's politics, while their policies, of course, prove otherwise. But to discuss that further, we're honored to be joined by Mona Shtaya, who is a Palestinian digital rights defender who works with Hamday, which is a Palestinian organization which works regarding Palestinian digital rights. Mona, thank you very much for taking your time out to join us today here on BMTV's The Scope. I'd like to get your reaction, Mona, firstly, about this report. As I said, it probably didn't come as much of a surprise. Am I right to say that?
Thanks for having me here tonight. And yeah, as you previously mentioned, nothing new came out of this report. Those recommendations that were basically mentioned in this report were recommended by the civil society organizations for years. We've been calling Meta's attention for the bias against Palestinians and the discriminatory policies against Palestinian content, Palestinian narrative for years now. It was never taken on a serious matter, or it was never taken seriously. This report came as a result of what happened last year in the May uprising, when we've seen a huge attack on the Palestinian digital rights. We at Hamla, the Arab Center of the Advancement of Social Media, have documented over 500 cases of content takedown or censorship on the social media platforms. 85% at that time were on Meta's platforms. As a result of that, the Meta's Oversight Board recommended Meta to conduct this due diligence on their Arabic Hebrew content moderation policies. And this report showed that there is bias, there is over enforcement on the Arabic Palestinian content, while there is largely under enforcement or barely enforcement on the Israeli hate speech, on the Israeli Hebrew content, which basically is full of hate speech, incitement, and violent content that we also are documenting in another report called the Index of Hate Speech, Incitement, and Violent Speech Against Palestinians and Arabs. And basically, the report also highlights that this censorship or this bias is an unintentional bias. But to be honest, because we've been highlighting that bias for years now, and it's like kind of systematic and ongoing censorship on the Palestinian content and Palestinian narrative, we think that even if it started as unintentional bias, it's now intentional because of
Okay.
ignoring that for years.
Yeah. But at the same time, it also discusses the fact that it has to respect the terror blacklist as well as sanctions that the US government and others place. So doesn't that almost by default mean that it is biased in some ways? Because we know that unfortunately, many of the groups on the terror blacklist are Arab/Muslim groups/Islamic groups, however we want to term it. And then that creates a very lopsided, uneven policy.
Thanks for your question. Actually, regarding the DOI policy, which is the Dangerous Organizations and Individuals policy, it's a bit problematic. And for years, we are calling for more transparency on this list because we don't know who are the organizations and individuals that designated basically on this list, and they were never transparent about that. They've never shared that till the beginning of this year when the Intercept they launched a leak about the members of or the organizations and individuals designated on this list. So the main takeaway out of this report that was written or published by the Intercept is there is disproportionality on how Meta is designating organizations and individuals on this list. Because if you just look at this list, you can see 48 Palestinian organizations and individuals were basically designated on this list. While if you just look at the Israeli side, you can only see two names, one for organization and another one for like a personality who's basically the co-founder of this organization. And if you just know a little bit about the Israeli politics, you know that inside the Israeli government itself, there are systematic calls to designate more militarized groups as terrorist groups. So inside the Israeli government, they are calling for that, while Meta, they didn't designate those groups on their list. And it's basically a very US-centric list because it's built on the US Department of State terrorist lists, but it's also going beyond that. So it's not only limited for the US Department of State terrorist lists, but also they have more designations, more names for individuals and for organizations on this list. The issue with this list is we don't have also transparency, not only about the names there, but also about how they are dealing with the content that mention those individuals and organizations, which basically they call it praise, support, and representation. Because as you know, the members of those organizations and individuals are not allowed to be on Meta's platforms, and even the content related to this list is also censored, because if you are praising or supporting or representing one of the DOI members, then you are not allowed to spread such a kind of content, but rather you can only share news around that. And even like if you just look at how Palestinians are dealing with such kind of content, they are encoding or they are distorting certain words that basically mentioned the members of the DOI list, even if they are just stating in news, because we have a higher chilling effect, a higher self-censorship. We Palestinians are concerned whenever they are writing even in news about the DOI list, because they are concerned of having content
Okay.
takedown or
So
content
if I may come into that, Mona, because you're right. Of course, content, as I said in introduction, gets taken down all the time. Accounts get deleted, suspended. Their reach gets limited on many of these platforms as well, right? Meta, as well as of course Twitter and others. What kind of an effect does that then have on people like myself and others as journalists who are trying to understand what is happening on the ground in Palestine? Does that, do you think, mean that we are not ever getting the proper full picture about what is happening?
It's definitely affecting what people are sharing on social media, because people are basically trying, as you know, to start with, or our starting point is Palestinians are using social media platforms to spread their narrative and to spread the story for what's happening on the ground, because the feeling there is the Palestinian cause is not doesn't have fair coverage from the international mainstream media. And as a result of that, Palestinians are trying to spread the news, spread their story and their narrative on the social media platforms. So whenever we have over enforcement, as the BSR report showed, like we have over enforcement, and as we at Hamlet documenting, many of the cases that we basically are escalating for social media platforms are false positive cases, which means those cases does not are not violating Meta's community standards, but they are sometimes documentations of human rights violations. And that means that the picture on the social media platforms is not like a full picture of what's happening on the ground. And sometimes you might see propaganda or disinformation from the Israelis, and you might not see Palestinian documentation of human rights violations and war crimes that Palestinians are exposed to. A couple of months ago, Palestinians in Gaza Strip, as you know, there was an attack, Israeli attack on Gaza Strip, and we also were documenting cases where documentations of human rights violations were taken down on Meta's platforms. One of like the very obvious cases that was taken down is a picture of a 5 years old child was murdered by the Israeli authorities during their attack on Gaza Strip. And this picture was taken down, and the excuse that Meta, or the justification that Meta gave for this user, is it violates their DOI policy, which doesn't make any it doesn't make any sense for a 5 years old to be on the DOI list, and they are not on the DOI list. But there is also technical glitches on how, as they call it, or sometimes glitches on how they are moderating the content. As a result of that, our narrative is distorted. It's not a full picture, and we are not able to share what we are exposed to. And as you know, the social media archives and social media content could also be as an evidence of war crime, of what's happening in Palestine. And whenever there are investigations of war crimes, then even evidence on war crimes in Palestine is not perfect when it comes to social media, and it lacks human rights documentations of war crimes. And this
Indeed.
means that we need to end this digital discrimination, so Palestinians could have the right to tell whatever, like to have the right to freedom of expression, to freedom of mobilization, and organizing themselves. Because as you know, like Palestinians are fragmented all around the world, and they need to build their movement with their allies and with other
Indeed.
pro-Palestinian people around the world.
Mona, I wonder, we spoke earlier about the US and the US terror list and DOI, right? But what kinds of links, verified links, are there, do you believe, between Facebook and Israel and the Israeli government? Are there links there, and do those links then create pressure on Facebook to censor these sorts of posts? Is that why we are seeing what we're seeing happening online? We're going to continue to discuss this very important topic after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on The Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi, and we're still joined by Mona Shtaya, who is a Palestinian digital rights defender who works with Hamle, as I said, which is an organization that works around Palestinian digital rights. And we're discussing specifically that report that Meta has released about its actions vis-a-vis Palestinian digital rights surrounding the May 2021 Israeli attack on Gaza and the implications surrounding it.
So back in 2015, the Israeli government established what they call Israeli Cyber Unit, which basically works systematically to monitor and document Palestinian content. After that, they are sending those pieces of content to the social media platforms. In 2016, the Israeli Cyber Unit sent around 2,000 requests to the social media platforms, and in 2000, they increased their request till in 2019, which is the most updated number that we have. They send around 20,000 requests to the social media platforms. And when I say the word request, it doesn't mean like one post or one tweet. It means a communication message that might have like hundreds of posts or hundreds of tweets to the social media platforms. And social media platforms are accepting are complying with most of those cases. And certain reports said that they are complying with 90% of those requests that the Israeli cyber unit is basically sending. which means that they are taken down or they are censoring most of those cases. And unfortunately, those numbers, our reference in those numbers is the Israeli authorities. We don't have any kind of transparency from Meta about those numbers. And this is one of the recommendations that were basically mentioned in the BSR report, which is having more transparency about the numbers that they are getting from the government. And the other thing that was basically lacked from the BSR report is highlighting this special relation, highlighting the cyber unit numbers to the social media companies in general and to Meta in particular in this report, which basically it has like a huge role when it comes to the over enforcement and under enforcement of the Israeli content again, which basically has like incitement, hate speech, and violent speech against Palestinians and Arabs.
The Israelis, Mona, would accuse Palestinians, in fact, of what you just said about violent or hate speech, right? There's always that argument of anti-Semitism that also comes up, and especially now with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism gaining more ground in certain places around the world. How do you respond to those accusations of anti-Semitism? Firstly, online, and secondly, do you think things are going to get worse?
Well, social media platforms were also mobilized by the Israelis to delegitimize Palestinians and to smear Palestinian human rights defenders as well as Palestinian human rights organizations. For years, as you mentioned, they were smearing them and calling them as anti-Semitic. But also, if we just like have a look at the Israeli propaganda on the social media platforms, we knew that they are spreading also disinformation, and this disinformation is barely moderated by the social media platforms. If we just look at the very recent thing where the Israeli spokesperson Al-Munassiq, or the coordinator, spread a piece of news when the veteran journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed back in May. They said, or they accused Palestinian gunmen to shoot Shireen Abu Akleh. We at Hamle have escalated this case to Meta because they're we've seen 5 or 6 maybe investigations that confirmed that Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by the Israeli authorities. We sent all those investigations to Meta. We were asking them to take down or to label at least this piece of content as disinformation. But Meta didn't take a clear action on that. They didn't label this video as a disinformation, and it stayed there. Then here we can see how content or how narratives on the social media platforms are formulated and how they are spread. And this can give us a clear example on how social media also could be a weapon to delegitimize Palestinians and their human rights work, as well as this basically aims to exclude Palestinians from the international arena and delegitimizing human rights work and the human rights defenders. And by the way, this is not only on Meta's platforms, but other also tech companies are using the same thing, and even they are utilizing that or weaponizing that against the workers. As we recently saw, Google tech workers, they publicly resigned because they were calling the recent Nimbus project, as you know.
Indeed. Yeah, if you allow me, because I also research digital rights, I'm researching digital rights for my master's as well, Mona, and I'm wondering if we can take a wider look at this, right? If we look at the example of how Palestinians are treated online, do you think that that is almost an example of what may happen to other such groups around the world? So I'll send the example of India and how it treats its Kashmiri activists online, right? So we know India has very good relations with with Facebook. Facebook has its headquarters, regional headquarters in India, and we know that whenever there are issues in Kashmir, Facebook also suppresses certain voices online. Do you think that it's important for there to be some solidarity across the lines beyond obviously the very important issue of Palestinians, to understand that this will at some point in time start affecting everybody who wants to speak out about certain issues?
I think, yeah, that's very clear, as you mentioned. And if we just want to think about the struggle for free, safe, and just like a digital space, then we should think in an intersectional way. We should think about other minorities and other groups like feminists, queers, sub-Saharan people, Myanmar, Kashmir, Latin America people, and how our content is basically moderated. And there is a huge intersection in how this content is basically moderated, because as you know, we are not like a big purchasing power for social media companies. And whenever we are talking about companies, then we are talking about economical interests. And because we are not an economic interest for them, then our content is basically moderated in a different way. Last year during May Uprising, when like there was a huge attack on the Palestinian digital rights, and Meta claimed that they have a technical glitch. But at the same time, when they issued that statement to highlight the technical glitch, they highlighted that this technical glitch is also affected other people around the world, like indigenous people of Colombia. So such technical glitches, such bias is basically targeting minorities and marginalized communities around the world. And here we are talking about marginalized communities in countries, and we are talking about like queers, feminist issues, where we can see that there is always also ongoing attack on women's rights, on feminists, on queers' rights on the social media platforms. And because of that, we usually escalate such cases to Meta as a trusted partner among other social media and tech companies. And but this is like an ongoing, and it needs a policy solution, because escalating individual cases is leading to individual solutions. We are like able now to take back certain content which they said that it doesn't violate the community standards. But to be honest, we
Yeah.
need to end the digital discrimination and have policy solutions, better policies, to make sure that everyone like have equal rights on the social media platforms generally, and on Meta's platforms in particular.
We have about just a minute left, Mona. Just wanting to get your final thoughts. Are you optimistic that things can change? Because in the Meta press release itself, it says that things will take time to change or fix. So they're not even giving an exact time frame about when things can be fixed.
Yeah, that's basically our demand now from Meta. We are asking Meta and calling on Meta to give us a clear, detailed timeline on how they are going to implement the 21 recommendation of BSR report, because we can't lose hope. We can't give up. We are working for years, and it's now happening. This report is a positive step in the right direction, but it's not the end. We now our work is starting. We need to put pressure on Meta to have a detailed timeline to understand how they are going to implement those recommendations, and to going beyond that, because we also have other demands from Meta. Where basically calling for years, and we will continue to do so until we end the digital discrimination against Palestinians and other marginalized communities around the world.
Very well, Mona. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your no doubt busy schedule. That was Mona Shtaya speaking to us live there. She's a Palestinian digital rights defender. She works with Hamde, which is a Palestinian digital rights organization. We discussed there Meta's report, or in fact, the report that Meta commissioned into how Palestinians were treated during May 2021 Israeli attack on Gaza, and how their rights were in fact curtailed. We'll, of course, be back next week, viewers, for another very important show here on BMTV in the scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. So please do join us for that show. And of course, please send us comments regarding today's show as well. Thank you very much for watching.